You're listening to the Anxious Scholar Podcast, a podcast for anxious scholars. If you're a high school student who can't wait to go to university, but also is kind of overwhelmed with lots of unanswered questions like me, then you've definitely come to the right place. On this podcast, I sit down with EGM alumni while they share valuable advice from this exciting journey of theirs that we have yet to take. I really hope you'll enjoy this episode and learn lots of useful information about the college application process, unis, and higher education in general. So hello, Jade.
Hello.
Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
No problem.
I'm really excited for this interview that we're going to do because up until now, I've only interviewed alumni from our school, and so you're a terminal student, so even though you're almost done with all the exams and all the last, the back stuff, what you experienced is very recent, so I'm really excited to talk about that. But before we begin, I was wondering if you could tell a little bit about yourself and your background to us.
Okay, sure. So I'm from China. I grew up in Beijing, and when I was 10 years old, I came here to Paris, France with my parents, and I've been studying at our school, EJM, ever since. And when I was in second, I took the OIB program, so I think by now you call it the BFE, and my special subjects were math, physique-chimie, and SES, and in terminale I kept math and physique-chimie.
Wow, that's all. It sounds really challenging, physique-chimie and math, and you just very recently done the bac spécialité. Yes. So how did that go for you? Could you tell a little bit about what happened?
Honestly, it's all right. Those are my favorite classes, and I'm really enjoying them. I got 20 in both my spés, so
wow.
That was pretty great.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's so impressive. Could you tell a little bit about the program of physique-chimie and math? Not necessarily the épreuve, but what you're studying, because like you said, it's very important to choose what you love,
right?
Or else we're gonna kind of suffer during the 2 years, and that's not a good thing. So yeah, if some people are considering choosing physique-chimie or math,
right?
What would you tell them? What is what did you do during those 2 years?
I think, like you said, it's really important to orient yourself according to your interests. So if you really like math and the sciences, I really recommend it because the program is really fun. So the math program is basically a continuation of what you guys have been doing in middle school, in troisième, seconde, etc. And physique-chimie gets a little bit different because I think in middle school we've only had science in English, and so the method is quite different. And there's a lot more knowledge content, like formulas that we have to learn, theorems, etc. Because I feel like in middle school, it's more of the skills that we focused on. So physique-chimie could be a change, but I think if you're really interested in the sciences, it's a really great experience too.
Okay, and what about SES? I know you only did it in première.
Yeah. So SES is also really interesting, but it's a little different from what we would have in university, for example, because what we did is mainly a lot of theory and a lot of rédaction, for example, and not so much the mathematical modeling part that you find in most university courses. So I would say there's that difference, but if you really want to major in economics or political science or something like this, I think it's still a really good basis to take just to get all the knowledge and the foundations of the subjects.
And when you were choosing your spécialité, and I think it's, I'm in second, so we chose this year. Did you already have in mind what you wanted to study in university, or was it you were choosing from what you liked in school?
Well, I knew I wanted to study something that's math related, but I also was really interested in the economics and business field because I found that could really apply my love for math to a lot of the social problems that we face today. And so that's what actually facilitated my choice. So that's how I ended up with math, SOS, and also physique-chimie because I was also really into the sciences, and physique-chimie is a very intense program in terms of the mathematical skills. So I think that's how I chose.
Yeah, from what you love, which is math.
Yeah, exactly.
Speaking of starting your application process and starting to consider what you want to study in university, when was that time for you, and what grade did you start to think about it?
So the advice I would give in general is to start as early as you can. So for me, for example, I think I started thinking about it around ninth grade, so troisième, and because I already knew I wanted to apply to schools in the U.S. for a very long time. So I also looked into their requirements in terms of your academic courses, your activities, all the skills that you need to fulfill in terms of universities. So I think by troisième I was starting to think, okay, what activities do I want to do? What classes do I want to take? And eventually, what not necessarily a precise major, but what direction or what field did I want to orient myself in university? So I think the advice I would give is to start early because that really facilitates your planning and makes the timing a lot easier in like the years where it's really going to get busy in second and premiere, for example.
And would you advise students to start by doing research, like you said, researching the requirements for each university, or looking more into themselves and what they like?
I think the first step would be more to look into themselves because ultimately you're choosing a school based on you and you're not trying to fit yourself into a school just because you like the name, for example. So I think it's really important as a first step to find what you love, what you would like to explore in the future, and find all the things that you could do which could complement this sort of profile that you want to present. Because university searches, for example, I think I've only started doing that in like late seconde and then premiere. And I've only really established my college list by the end of premiere and beginning of terminal. So there's really enough time for that. But I think in the early years, it's really important to just find what you love to do.
Find yourself, like understand your identity.
Exactly.
Yeah. And if you don't mind, giving us an example from your personal experience, what was this realization like for you? What did you, when you started thinking about it, what did you say? Oh, well, I'm actually, like you said, passionate about math, or I want to do, you do debate, so that's something I'm also interested in. So
okay.
What was that for you? Yeah.
So about math, for example, I've always loved it since middle school. I've been doing a lot of harder math that were outside of our school curriculum, and so in ninth grade, I heard about this compagnie maths. You guys can ask our math teachers about it. They all know it. They recommended it to me, and that was the selection test for a training team, the Préparation Olympique Française des Mathématiques. So I passed that and I integrated that team. And so every month we would do a lot of training programs on Olympic level math, which is harder and more abstract than what we would do. And so I really loved that process, and that made me realize that I wanted to do something in the future that uses that and that applies that. And then I remember the year when I was in troisième, it was the year of COVID-19, and so our first confinement. So during that time, I wanted to do something special, and so I started looking at the stock progressions of a lot of companies that were related to traveling, so airline companies, for example, and I realized that I could do something about it. So I ended up doing a research project on my own, analyzing like the stock progress of these different European airline companies, Air France, etc., and how they performed, how that showed how they performed under COVID circumstances. And I also used for that project, because I really wanted to apply my math skills, so I used some modeling and algorithms to predict the stocks, for example. And so yeah, and that made me really want to go into a field that combines like math and economics, for example, because that really allowed me to solve a lot of the concrete issues that we face today.
That's really impressive. And how would you mention that in your application? Like, where would that section kind of be, and where you say, oh, well, I did this, research work? And
I think it depends. The Common Application, which is the system that the United States uses for college applications, they give you a section for activities. So I think they let you list out 10 activities maximum. So one of the categories is academic or research. So I think I've listed that project as one of them. And otherwise, other universities will ask essays like, why would you like to study this major, or something interesting that you've done. So I think I took the time to develop that project in some of these essays.
Okay, I understand. Because there's a lot of different categories and like how they evaluate their candidates.
Yeah.
And so, like you mentioned, essays is one of them. So I know you said that for the U.S. there's a lot of requirements. It's maybe a big a longer process. So when did you start writing your Common App essays for the U.S.? Did you use any like examples like essay anthologies to get inspired or get an idea of what they're looking for?
Sure. So for that, my most important advice is really listen to what the school tells you and what Mrs. LeBaume suggests you do, because what I did was that I completely followed the timeline that she set up for me, and it worked out really well. So I think for all the applicants of my year, we had to write a common application essay. So that would be one huge essay of, I think, 600 words that every university looks at, and that would be the common thing among all your applications. So for that essay, we started to work on it in April. Mrs. LeBaume organized a workshop for all of us. By the way, Mrs. LeBaume is our admissions counselor for the U.S., just to specify.
Thank you.
So she organized this workshop for all of us, and then she presented us with an essay booklet that is comprised of all the successful essays that our students have written in the past. So we used those as sources of inspiration, and they really helped me, for example, get some ideas about what I can write about. So that workshop was just to teach us the tips to write that Common App essay, and then we would just set out to write drafts. We had to submit our first draft by June 30th, I think, so it's probably the same time for you guys. And our finalized draft by the end of summer, so like August 30th or something.
Okay.
And then, so that's for the Common App essay, and then for the individual essays, because each school asks for their own essays, just to evaluate them and see if you fit them in particular. Those ones, I would say maybe start drafting them like in the end of première. So for example, I used my April holidays at the end of première to start on the schools I was most interested in, and most of them I did them so either during the Toussaint holidays or the Christmas holidays of terminale, because I have to admit, like with homework and everything, that was the only time I could find. So I think that's the timing I would suggest to most students.
Do you remember any, do you have any examples of questions that, the particular universities had for you that you had to answer in your essays?
Sure. Some of them were actually quite similar across different schools. I think almost every school asked the question of why would you like to study at this school? And so for that, you really need to do your school research and see which characteristics of the school really matches your personality and what you want to do, etc., and what is unique about the school. And they also ask about why major, so why would you like to study? So for example, my majors were mostly math or applied math and economics, so I had to discuss why I want to study those two subjects in particular. And otherwise, I think it varies across different schools. So for example, Stanford this year asked questions like, tell me about a historical moment that you wish you witnessed, or write a letter to your roommate.
Yeah.
And then Pomona College, the one I'm attending next year, asked questions like, tell us about an object that you're really excited to bring to college. So they're really all these original questions.
Yeah, it allows you to be creative.
Exactly, yeah, I really like that actually.
And did you get to, show more of your like personality during your interviews? Did you have to do interviews?
So interviews, I think not all schools have them, especially when we're in France, because for international students, it can be quite hard to find alumni that are available to interview us, because that's the particular thing about the US. It's that your interviewers are always the alumni from the school and not admissions officers. So it depends on how many resources they can allocate. But I would say that for every big Ivy League, you would usually get an interview. So for example, for me, I got interviewed by, I think, Yale, Princeton, Stanford, Columbia, and Harvard. So those were really fun experiences, because it's not like the UK, it's not like Oxford, where it's completely academic and you have to solve problems in front of them and everything. This, and even they tell you this, it's completely casual, it's like a conversation, they just talk about you, about what you've done with your life, what you like, etc. So I think it's a pretty relaxing process, honestly.
Yeah, and it's good for, your experience.
Exactly, yeah. Because you can express fully your personality in front of a person who's actually trying to help you.
Yeah, no pressure.
Exactly.
And did you prepare in any way for them? Is it possible to prepare for those interviews?
I think you could do mock interviews. So, for example, I think I did some with my parents, but my advice is to not overly prepare because if you do, it's going to feel less natural and so less casual. And so the admissions officer might be less comfortable to communicate with you than if you just presented yourself in a really natural way.
Yeah, just like a casual conversation.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, so we talked about interviews, essays. What about additional exams? So for America, there's obviously the SAT.
Right.
So we could definitely talk about that, how you prepared for it, when to start.
Yeah.
But what about UK? I know you applied to Oxbridge. By the way, did you apply to Oxford or Cambridge?
Oh, here's the thing. It's strongly disrecommended to apply for early action or early decision and Oxbridge at the same time. I'm not even sure that's allowed, actually. So at the beginning, that's what I wanted to do, but then the school strongly opposed it. So
because it's a lot of work.
Exactly, it's a lot of work, and it's quite hard to handle both sides because they're all really demanding. So in the end, I ended up doing early action in the U.S. So I didn't apply for Oxbridge
at all.
At all.
At all.
Yeah.
So not even in the UK or other universities in the UK?
Other universities in the UK I did, but not Oxbridge.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, I know because they definitely have interviews. So they have two rounds of interviews and additional exams.
Yeah.
So if there isn't anything other than SATs, we should probably talk about this one. So when did you start, preparing for it?
Okay, so the SATs, the school actually offers preparation sessions. I think they start in Seconde. With Mr. Shapiro, who is incredibly nice. I love him so much, so you guys would be really lucky if you have him. So he prepares us to take the SAT test. So we have a session every week and homework along with practice tests on a lot of weekends. So I think the school really prepares us well for the SATs. And otherwise, just a few weeks before the test, I would say make sure you practice consistently, do some past papers, etc., because that's what I did. And in terms of timing, so I started preparing them with the school in Seconde, and I decided to take them at the beginning of premier year, so I think October in première. And my score was 1560 out of 1600, so I was happy with them, so I didn't retake them. But I know that you can retake them if you want to. There are multiple chances in the year. So one of my friends, for example, took it the same day as me, but she took it once again in March. Another took it again in May or in August. So I would say maybe aim for taking them at the beginning of première. Work quite hard during them in seconde so that you have a strong basis for them. And otherwise, if you're not happy with your scores, there are always plenty of chances that you can take to maybe catch them up.
Mm-hmm. And did you find it hard to prepare for the SATs, kind of in parallel with schoolwork, which is very, demanding, or was it kind of made easier because it was part of a program in your school?
I think the hard part is mainly the time you have to dedicate to practice because I think the test-taking skills are quite easy to get, and Mr. Shapiro makes them really clear, so that part is all right. It's just the time that you have to dedicate to really practice them in order to try to get the most answers correct on the test day. And also, the math program can be a little more advanced than what we do in the OIB program, so that was a little different. I have always done advanced math, so it was not a problem for me, but I know for some of my friends, they found it that it was quite a gap, so maybe you also need to take a little bit of time to catch up the math. But otherwise, I think it's all right. I mean, the academic level is not meant for you to get a low score. It's meant for you to pass, to have a high score. It's not like a really selective competition. So normally it should be fine.
It's supposed to be high school level.
Exactly.
At least in America.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. So, again, you spoke about, you doing advanced maths during high school and your years in middle school, high school. Yeah. So I wanted to talk more about, your time, before university. So right now. And particularly also maybe like extracurricular activities that you do. Sure. For example, did you participate in or win any Olympiads or competitions, such as, for example, the math one?
So for math, I think I got third or fourth places in the Math every time, but that would be the selection test, so not an actual international Olympiad or national Olympiad. I did do the Olympiade de première when I was in premiere. I think I got the equivalent of an honorable mention, and so that was pretty cool. Right. Otherwise, I think my awards mainly come from debate because I've been doing that club since quatrième. So I've gotten several best delegates in debate club. And otherwise, I also joined history club for 2 years. 1 year we did the international history B and Bull. So we were in teams. We had to answer questions on a quiz. It was really fun. I think we were ranked like second place in the tournament. Yeah, that was really fun.
Would you mind talking more about debate? Because
Yeah,
I mean,
sure.
I personally do debate also, and you're my head chair. And
You're
I
a
think
good debater.
Thank you, Jade. That's really nice of you. But yeah, personally, I really love it, and I think it has many benefits. And so I wanted to talk about it because people young students who might not be in debate might consider starting it. And I thought it's really not like you want to be a politician or you want to work in do
That's
politics.
right,
For example, like you want to do math, economics.
Yeah.
It's really like more than that. It's speaking skills, research skills, argumenting.
Absolutely.
So how did you come to join the debate club? Why did you want to do that, and how did that experience go for you? From going from a student to a head chair.
Yeah,
it's pretty impressive.
Sure, thank you. So in middle school, I think like during my sixième and cinquième years, I had two best friends who did debate. One of them is Karina, my co-head chair currently, and both of them would bully me every day about debate because I wasn't doing it with them. I was doing another activity at the same time, and then every day they would tell me these amazing stories they would have in their debate sessions. And I was like, you know what, guys, okay, I'm going to join in quatrième. We're going to see how it goes. So that's what I did, and I really liked it because I think it's like you said, Victoria, it's not about becoming a politician. It's not about just studying like international relations, for example. It really, in general, practices your speaking skills, your confidence, persuasive skills, and really trains all your skills in the aspects of like reacting in a public speech, reacting to questions, planning out your strategy in an MUN, for example. I think those are skills that you will need in every major and every walk of life. So I think it's a really valuable experience no matter what major you want to go into. So yeah, I would definitely recommend the younger members of our school to join debate. And in terms of my role in debate club, I remember in quatrième, I was selected to participate in the JMN conference that was normally only open to troisième and above because I was really involved in every session we did, so my chair ended up recommending me. And I think since then I've just never stopped attending conferences and playing a really active role in them. And in the end, my head chairs at the time were also really impressed with what I'd done because they also chaired me during a lot of JMN conferences, so they just chose me when they had to pass the torch to the next grade.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And do you have a favorite moment from those conference experiences, debating experience? I mean, I personally had my first ones this year where I did a MCOP 27, and I also went to Madrid for the HMS. So that was amazing.
So lucky. Yeah. I had to do it online because it was COVID my year.
I can imagine it's completely different. When you get to meet those people, the Harvard
staff.
It's
true. I'm jealous of you guys, honestly.
Yeah. For which one did you do if you had the chance since it was COVID?
Which conference? So before COVID, I attended a conference called Lyman, which is organized by another international school, Lycée Saint-Germain-en-Laye. That was really fun. And otherwise, during COVID, I attended the HMCE, so we were online, but so Harvard chairs connected with us and organized like a virtual debate on Zoom, which was also really fun, even though there wasn't the experience you get like actually in Madrid.
Yeah.
A favorite moment, it would be hard to choose, honestly. They're all really fun experiences. I remember in our Lyman conference, which was my first conference with other schools actually. We passed a lot of really funny clauses. Like there was a moment where we passed a clause about like investing into a time machine so that we actually can change the past so that the issue that we're gonna solve doesn't happen.
Wow.
Which it's like it's innovative thinking.
Yeah,
like that's not the solution you would really get.
Yeah.
The funny thing is we actually passed it. So
that's great.
That was funny.
So yeah, extracurricular activities definitely show your passion for universities, especially if they kind of make sense, you know what I mean? Like if you're doing Math
Olympiads. That's what I suggest actually.
Absolutely.
Like to not do an activity for the sake of that, but maybe just make it complement your profile and make sure it says something interesting and relevant about you.
Yeah. And like you said, there's also other things that complement your profile. And I was wondering, for example, if volunteering work or like, involvement in the community is something that is important for the US like the UK, or is it more valued in the US?
So once again, volunteering, I think like every activity, you need to make sure you're doing it in order to add some value to the profile that you want to present and not just for the sake of it. And so I would really advise to do some volunteering. I would really suggest it because it benefits society as well as yourself. It makes you gain a lot of experience. So it's a really valuable experience in general. But I think if you want to do it, I would advise you to do it in an area where you're personally interested in. So for me, for example, I was always really interested in education and educational inequality because I have met and tutored a lot of students in poor places in China, for example, and I've been really touched by their backstories. So the volunteering experiences I did was mostly like tutoring to younger students, tutoring to refugees in Paris, for example, because I've always wanted to solve that kind of issues. So I think that's how to approach the volunteering. And in terms of how the universities value it, I think both the US and the UK would value it if you put it on paper. The US, I would feel like they require it more because they evaluate more the person you are than just your academics. So social responsibility, it's true that it is a bigger component in the US application, and it's definitely something that that applicants should have. In the UK, we also have to write a personal statement, but that personal statement is actually almost entirely focused on our major. And there's like this one paragraph in the end where you can say the activities that you do outside of school. And so that's where we usually put all the volunteering experience. So I think they do look at it, but the US really grants a lot of importance to it because social responsibility is one of the really important criteria for US universities.
And overall, what would you say made you stand out the most on your application?
Made me stand out the most?
Yeah.
It's hard to say, honestly. Admissions officers don't give feedback, so it's hard to say what really gets you in. I would feel like it's maybe my multicultural experience because even in China, I'm part of a minor ethnicity. My parents are from Inner Mongolia, so we are part of a different ethnicity than the Han ethnicity, which is the majority. And so the culture is really quite different with the culture of Beijing, for example, that I've always experienced since I was born. And so I've always had to live with that kind of mix. And then when I came to France, well, it's another kind of mix because it's like European versus Chinese culture. And so that's actually the story I told in my Common App essay. It's this journey of crossing diverse cultures and blending them together. So I would say that's a really unique aspect about my profile.
Very interesting. Yeah, and it's beautiful because everyone's is different and everyone's like the things that make them stand out on their application is different.
Is different, yeah. That's also the beauty of the US application, I would say.
Absolutely.
They really allow you to assert that individuality.
Yeah, your identity. True. And to continue, to talk about your time in high school, your activities. It's more specific, but I was wondering since it kind of applies to seconds in particular. For example, the stage that you did in seconde.
Yes.
Is this something that you can mention on your application, or is this kind of irrelevant, or you don't have to talk about it, and is this something that you should choose like according to your major, so that it's kind of like it becomes relevant?
Yeah, definitely. So you guys are lucky because troisième was our confinement year, so we only had one stage that we could do, and that was in seconde. I think it is best if it's somewhat related to what you want to do. It doesn't have to be. So for example, I did mine at PayPal, and I was working on their project about inaugurating electronic checks in Europe because PayPal is in the fintech sector, so it combines finance and technology. And I was more in the legal research department. I had to help them solve a lot of issues that they might encounter with the legal system, etc. in Europe, and research some legislations concerning that. So it wasn't necessarily completely related to what I wanted to study, but it was still a fun experience.
Economics.
Yeah, exactly, and innovation and stuff like that, so it was fun. And so in terms of applications, so I put my internship as one of the activities that the common application asks you to list. Otherwise, for the UK, I think they're looking more at paid internships if they ask you to fill in any, so I didn't fill it in the end. But I think for the US, it's definitely something they would look at.
And how would you advise students to kind of present it, the day, because you're supposed to, make a visual presentation, not just like a rapport. So yeah, how do you really, show, make the most out of your experience and really to show the people assessing you, what you did and what you learned?
Yeah. So here's the thing about activities in the US. You have, I think, 200 and something characters to describe it. And so in terms of words, that is really not a lot. It's like 2 sentences, not even. So I think in order to describe it so concisely and to make sure it adds value to your application, you should just like really summarize what you did, the important contributions that you made, and also if the school gave you a good grade on your rapport de stage, you should also say it. So for example, I was ranked exceptionnel during my presentation, so I put it in, and I think that was also a great help.
And how do you think students can get this exceptionnel, like?
Oh, from the school, you mean?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so what I did was I checked out some really brilliant rapports that the library keeps in the school archives, and so I kind of like inspire myself from their structure, their content, and everything. And I think it's just to do your best when you're writing that. Make sure you describe the company well, describe in detail what you did, and especially your own reflections, like what you learned. And that actually will also help if you want to write an essay about it to university, for example, because the reflection is always what they're looking for. And then in terms of the oral presentation, I would say just to synthesize all that material and present it clearly and beautifully, and just maybe practice sometimes to make sure you're familiar with it, because the people evaluating you will be teachers and parents, so it's not going to be that stressful. Just like relax and present all the contributions you did, like really se mettre en avant. And yeah, I think that's what usually gives you the highest ranks.
Yeah, and to close this parenthesis about the stage, I mean, it's something that we're going to do soon, so I thought it was really interesting to talk about. But what if, for example, the company doesn't let you have a big role and particularly do a lot of tasks like you did, do innovative work? How would you still be able to put your best foot forward, even though you weren't able to do a lot?
So actually it's normal if the company doesn't give you the most important works, because you haven't studied their major, you haven't studied their sector in particular, and you are a high school student. So even for me, it was like the kind of work that they knew I could do, and it's not really crucial to one of their projects, for example. So in terms of that, I would say don't worry about it. Just do your best at whatever they give you, and what's really good is if you do something more than they expect. For example, if they ask you to compare something, maybe do a presentation where you do that more clearly and you annotate that. I think I remember that's what I did. So, and also I think you're usually accompanied by a monitor or a mentor who guides you through the stage process. And if that's the case, make sure you ask him all the questions you can and tell him about your thoughts about a certain project. They really love to hear from that, especially when you can bring in a new idea that they haven't thought about.
I think this is more, it concerns more the US, especially right now, because since they changed the BFE for us. So what happened is that from OEB, it became more of I think an international bac with an American section. So the American section,
you have an AP program,
exactly.
Right?
It allows us to
I heard
have
that.
AP, exactly. So we have a mandatory kind of history and geography where we can choose history or geography, and English, literature, or language.
Okay.
So yeah, and then there's math calculus or math statistics that we can choose in addition.
Okay.
So I think you even had less kind of options or choices when you were doing the.
Yeah, we definitely had less choices. It was just our specialty.
Yeah. So do you think that's important for students in the US? Because in the US, students have I don't know, maybe 7 APs kind of.
It's true. It's true.
Or is it okay because the universities look at your school in general, what it offers, and it can see clearly that, well, you didn't have 10 APs to choose from, so it's okay that you didn't do any or only did 2. And so how do they look, like, how do they kind of relativize? Like,
Okay. First of all, I think the AP is definitely an advantage because it is a central part of the U.S. program, and it's true that most American high schools offer that. So if you have the opportunity to take classes like AP Lit, AP Calculus, I definitely recommend it. However, I don't think it's a downside to your application if you don't have that many APs. We didn't have any at all, for example, and we still get relatively good results for admissions. So I think the really important thing to remember is that the OIB program itself is extremely unique, and universities look at that and they take that into account. And they actually understand it because we have been applying to these universities year after year. So the OIB program itself should be an advantage, and so therefore that's why they won't look down upon us if we don't have as many APs as the American students do, because they know that we're doing another program that's just as challenging and that's also really distinctive from what they're used to. So I wouldn't think the number of APs would be a problem because especially now that they have combined APs and the French Bac, I really think it's a unique system that will make our students stand out no matter what.
And do you think they kind of valorize IB over OIB or not, necessarily?
I would say definitely not, because here's the thing with the IB program. It's also really rigorous and challenging. Its quality is not to be doubted. However, it also is the program that most high schools in other countries operate on. So, for example, in China, Korea, Japan, I know that most of my friends who are in these countries and who go into the international path, they usually take the IB because that's the best international course that's offered there. So the thing with IB is that it's also really rigorous and it's also really recognized, but we might have some more direct competition with other countries, whereas the OIB, maybe they know it less, it's true, but it's also more unique in that way. So I think both programs have their advantages in this sense.
And I wanted, because I want to talk about the US more, and I think, I don't know if you would prefer to talk about that since you applied probably to more universities in the US, or not in particular.
My main focus was the US, I would say. Okay. So
yeah. So to kind of close kind of the parenthesis on the UK,
sure.
I was wondering, and I know that you didn't apply in the end to Oxford and Cambridge.
I have a lot of friends who did, so I'm really familiar with the process too.
Yeah, and plus you were probably researching beforehand.
Exactly. Yeah.
How, for example, your friends, if you don't mind talking, how do they choose between the two? I mean, you can't choose both, which is
It's true. It's a rule that they impose. You can't apply to both.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So if I know you didn't have to make this choice in particular, but like, what do you think are the criteria? Like, how do you make this choice?
Yeah, honestly, I really understand that concern because it was also my main concern when I was researching these schools, because at the time I was still wanting to do Oxford and I knew that I can only choose one. However, both offered really strong curriculum, so there was also a lot of hesitation on my side. I would say for that, maybe research in depth to each school, look at what you want to major in. And for the UK, this is especially important because remember, you can't change your major. Once you're in for the 3 years of your bachelor. So that's what's different than with the US. In the US, you do apply to a field of concentration, but you can take any classes you want once you get in. In the UK, you have to study the major that you are admitted for, and that is definite for all 3 years. So I would say really make sure you know what major you want to go for, and then research that major in Oxford and in Cambridge to make sure you know which one has the curriculum that suits you best. And otherwise, really talk to your counselor about what you want to do, and they will provide really good advice. So listen to your counselors and do research in depth. That's what I would say.
Okay, thank you for the advice. And now to look broader, for people who might not know if they want to like apply to the UK and the US.
Yeah, sure.
And I know that, I don't know if it's like a sure thing, but it's very hard to do, not very hard, but it's harder to do both because they're different. And
That's
so
true.
To do them in parallel, it's usually not recommended unless, you really show that you're committed to it. And for example, in your case, you were recommended to do both.
So I wanted to do both initially, but I was disrecommended from the school because everybody was telling me that it would be too much work, and so in the end I ended up focusing on the U.S.
Okay.
But that just applies to Oxbridge and Early Action.
Mm-hmm.
To other schools in the UK who don't require admission tests, at least who don't require admission tests at the same time as the US application, I was encouraged to do them.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, Mrs. LeBon encouraged me to apply to schools in the UK other than the US because of the relationship between China and the US right now, which is not very certain, so she thinks that I should have some backups in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say that problem only applies if you want to do Oxbridge and like Early Action and Ivy League, for example.
Yeah, exactly. And for example, people who want to do, those want to aim for the top schools, Ivy Leagues and Oxbridge, what would you say is like I know you did a lot of research about them. What do you think is the main differences kind of between the two, excellence universities?
Sure. So the system, it's true, you said it yourself, it's completely different. In terms of the US, first of all, there's the selection process. The US looks at your academics, of course. However, it's not their only consideration because they also take into account your activities, your projects, your essays, your personality. So preparing for the US is really a process where you have to do your schoolwork well, but also manage every other task, every other activity, take time to write your essays, to think about the profile you want to present. It's a lot more holistic process than the UK because Oxbridge focuses mainly on your academics and very rigorously. So you have to pass their admission tests, their interviews, and they're all focused on the course that you want to take and not on anything else that the US looks at, for example. So that would be the main difference. And also in terms of your life when you're in the university, so like I said, in the US, they follow a more liberal arts education. So you can choose the major you want, and I think you only determine your major after your second year. Whereas in the UK, you have to start your major right away and there's no way to change it. So there's also that. If you're really determined with what you want to study, the UK could be a good choice. But if you're really not, maybe the US has a curriculum that fits you better. So it depends on the applicant itself, I would say.
And was this your case, or did you already choose your major despite going to America?
So this was partly the reason why the US was my top choice, because I wanted to have that flexibility in terms of major choice. I was planning to orient myself in the mathematics and the economics field. So in schools in the UK, I applied for programs that kind of mix both. So for example, statistics and economics or mathematics and economics, stuff like that. So that I would like leave myself some flexibility even if I go to the UK.
Mm-hmm. And if you don't mind giving us kind of a more precise idea, the requirements of the U.S.,
of
which,
course.
Like you said, academics are important. So what kind of are the grades that you're expected to have, to be considered or to have a higher chance of getting accepted?
First of all, I would say from what I've been observing through the U.S. application, the absolute value of your grades really doesn't matter that much in terms of your results, and that's, in most cases, it's not what makes the difference. I think our transcripts are translated to the US grading system where you have like A+, A, B, C, and stuff like that. And normally a 16 to 20 is already an A+. So if you get a 17 or even a 16, like don't panic because you didn't get a 19 or a 20, because ultimately it doesn't make that. That's not the thing that really makes a difference because it's already good enough for the universities. So I would say there's not really a required grade that you need to get. It just has to be good enough. You just have to do your best. For SATs, maybe I would say aim for a 1550 plus if you want to aim for Ivy Leagues. But once again, for example, a 1560 and a 1580 doesn't really make a difference. In the US, I feel like what makes you stand out is really something special that you can present in your essays, in your activities, just something that catches their attention and that distinguishes you from all the other nerdy applicants that are in competition with you. So I feel like that's more what they look at rather than how high your grades are compared to the other people.
Okay. Yeah, it's really important to understand that, from how do they, like you said, somebody's going to panic because they got a 16. But
exactly,
actually,
but that's, that's not really the point when you're applying to these schools.
So it can definitely sort of, I don't know how to say that, but make you lose some nerves,
Exactly.
It's very important.
And that's also important when you consider how you manage your time. So don't just focus all your time onto one subject because you want to get that 20 and not end up with the 17. Like, maybe make sure you balance your time between your schoolwork, your activities, your social life, your everything else that you really love to do, because ultimately that's what makes a difference.
Yeah, it's important to establish your priorities.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, and to end this interview, I was wondering if there would be something that you could tell your younger self, a piece of advice, something that you wished maybe you did wrong, you did differently, or, to maybe someone listening to our podcast will be able to get this advice for their future.
Yeah, sure. So, I don't know if this sounds too pessimistic, but I would tell my younger self, don't expect that much. Don't get your hopes up since the beginning, because especially if you're a student who has really good grades, who has really good activities, it's really easy to think, oh yeah, of course I can get into Harvard, of course I can get into Princeton, like, there's no doubt about that, because that is not true. These schools are very selective, and the reasons that they would take a student or reject a student, you can never be sure about them, because there can always be a donation, a legacy, an athlete, somebody they just wanted to take because of some special thing they wrote on their essay. So it's really not your fault if you get rejected, and that's what happens to most applicants. So I would say to the younger applicants now, or even to myself in the past, just make sure that you have that you're prepared for the worst, even if you do your best.
Even if you work hard.
Exactly. Because, so for me, for example, I applied to the Ivy Leagues in Stanford as well. I didn't get into any of them, so I was waitlisted by 5 of them. So initially, like, I was quite disappointed, I have to admit. And then, so Mrs. Laban was telling me, well, this is normal as a member of the Asian pool, which is really competitive. I've already done my best. And so that really made me see that it's the result itself is not what matters. It's not what I can control. And so the important thing for every applicant, I would say, is just to make sure you do everything you can to present yourself in the best light and to become the best student and the best person that you can be.
Yeah, because in the end you get so much experience from this.
Exactly, yeah. It's all the personal growth and all the things that you learn, all the skills that you develop are actually worth a lot more than that good offer. So
absolutely. It's really valuable advice because, like you said, you might have the academics, you might have the whole profile, but there are so many kind of factors going in their choices that may not even
and you never know them. So
absolutely, you never find out.
Exactly. And so, on a more positive note, if a university doesn't accept you, just know that it really doesn't determine who you are. It really doesn't discredit your abilities, and you need to know that all of you are brilliant in your own way, and it's not an offer that will value that or that will discredit that. So, yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Jade. Thank you much for coming on the podcast and sharing your experience.
You're welcome.
Taking your time to share, your challenges, your advice. I think it's really important to have this, conversation between the generations.
Of course,
and to help each other. Because I think it's a very beautiful process, a beautiful journey.
Of course.
Where, like you said, we really grow and learn a lot of things.
So I hope it really does help all of you, and good luck on your applications.
Yeah, and good luck with the end of your bac.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jade. Thank you for tuning in on this episode of the Anxious Scholar podcast. See you in 2 weeks for the next interview, and don't miss out on any additional information on our Instagram @TheAnxiousScholar.